And I just wanted to welcome you all here today. I am going to ask the other presenters today, part of our panel, to introduce themselves in a moment. I just wanted to give a little background about myself. I've worked with the NSDA equity committees for the national tournament for the last 3 years, and it's been a very eye-opening experience, as well as an exciting experience to learn and listen to people from around the country about issues of equity. But very often when students come to us, those issues, there are struggles. And so it's difficult work. And I want to say up front, I appreciate Nicole Wanzer-Serrano, who has led us in the national office for the last 2 years on the equity committee. And the work that she does is amazing. And the rest of the panelists for today's presentation are amazing, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, Kristy Thomas. Oh, Scott, that smile, stop it. I have been in this world of speech and debate since I was a freshman in high school, competed in high school, college, was a coach for a really long time, had success there, and started a writing and publishing business and followed that up with a diversity consulting firm, and with Scott have worked quite a few equity offices this year, and different panels, different engaging conversations. So excited to be a part of another one. Thanks.
I am Angelique Ronald, and I am the Vice President of Activities of the California High School Speech Association, which is just our way of using too many words to say that I am the State Tournament Director in California. I also serve as the Curriculum Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice for the Institute for Speech and Debate. But my primary focus over the last many years has always been equity in speech and debate, but particular when we talk about a gender achievement gap in speech and debate. And so I was had the privilege of writing an article for Rostrum, which was fantastic, and given a couple presentations on this subject. And so I'm so excited to talk with y'all today about how we can make the tournament space and even the team space a more accessible and safe one for everybody, because that is the most important thing we can do.
Good afternoon. My name is Crawford Lavoy, and it is a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and at the same time see so many new faces. I serve as the Director of Speech and Debate for Durham Academy in Durham, North Carolina. And in that role, I also serve in a number of local leagues. As far as my work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is concerned, up until this year, I served as the caucus leader for the LGBTQ+ Coaches Caucus. I have chaired the National Catholic Forensic League's Equity Advocate Division, but also their committee to work on their own. And at the same time, it is important work that I have worked with not only some of our presenters with at tournaments around the country, as well as just personal text message conversations about how to improve our activity. But at the same time, I've sat down and had many face-to-face conversations with several of you about my own experiences, your experiences, our students' experiences, and how we as a community grow together to create a better environment for everyone.
Excellent, thank you. And
Scott, you're muted.
of course I am, because of course that's going to happen. All right, so Renee, are you here? Renee Moss is on our panel as well. She texted me a few minutes ago and said she was going to be late, so she may not be here yet. Okay. I made it all through the fall semester, never once talking during muting. And then after that, I made a comment about that, and now it happens all the time. So there you go. I really want to leave this as a conversation, and panels I think are important, and our experts that are here, but there are others of you that are not necessarily sitting on the panel officially, but are experts in this field as well. And I'd like this to be a conversation where people can talk about the questions that they have, the conversations that they're happening in their communities, because all of us come from different aspects of the world and the country. And so what is equity committees looking like? Have you seen moments of really successful equity panels? Have you got questions about what you should do? Where are all of us in this discussion? Because I think we're probably all in different places based on our own experiences. And so if any of the panelists would like to start with an idea and we can just build off of that.
I think it would be really cool if everyone minds being a little interactive for a moment, either literally raising your hand or Zoom raising your hand. Most of the tournaments you attend, whether virtual or otherwise, if they have equity committees or equity panels, raise your hand. So a number of you, but not like a ton, right? And so I think that that's a really good place for us to start, right? Because there has been a movement in the last, I would say particularly the last year or two, right, in our activity to have equity panels at tournaments. And while a lot of the big tournaments are starting to have them, whether it's invitationals, national tournaments, state championships, it's less common on a local level or district level, right? And for those of you who are not terribly familiar, an equity committee is just a group of folks. It's their job to handle any equity concerns that come in. What's an equity concern, right? And that's usually, I always simplify it to be something related to harassment or discrimination, right? Sometimes people will come in with rule violations and things like that, right? But overwhelmingly, it's something to do with harassment or discrimination and kind of the best way to handle that. So I would love, I know, like for example, Crawford, you take a lead on a lot of that, and Scott as well, and Kristy, actually all of y'all. I would love for us to talk a little bit about like the role of an equity committee and what you've seen that works and doesn't work. And then like audience, if you have things you've seen, I always joke we don't get paid enough to reinvent the wheel, none of us. So this is our wonderful space to share those ideas, and I will absolutely steal your ideas. I just want you to know that, so.
I would say what definitely works is the idea of a panel rather than it being one individual person. For example, Crawford knows PF and LD like the back of his hand. I know speech like the back of my hand. Baker knows both of the extempts like the back of his hand. So to create a panel that's balanced like that, so that if an LD concern happens, and I, as someone who really specialized in speech when I was coaching, it may be something that's more of a challenge for me because my expertise has been on the side of speech. I think it is a misconception to think that anyone can be on an equity panel. If you really want to create a diverse panel, I think you need to have a panel where there are people who have some of like all of the things that live underneath the umbrella of speech and debate, that there's someone there that can really speak to it to make an equity concern make sense, given the realm of, oh, this was a POI round and this was happening. Then someone can say, oh, well, maybe this will help you to understand it. So that's just kind of some food for thought when you are hosting a tournament and you're thinking about having an equity office and having, at least 2 people in there. And then the most important thing is, because it takes that pressure off and you get to popcorn ideas off of each other rather than it just being one person who's responsible for everything, to be able to reach out to someone, have a conversation, and take respectfully what each other is saying into account.
My thoughts always begin with where Angelique sort of left off, which is what is the role of an equity office or an equity committee at a tournament? Too often, each and every one of us is well aware of what happens when someone violates the rules, right? We can all point to a manual of the local league or the national organization where X has been violated. To me, an equity concern is something where something feels wrong, but there is no statute in a manual that says X has been done, right? We would know this because there is no statute, right, that says judges should not pick up their cell phone in the middle of a round. We have all advised judges not to do that, but that does not mean that there is a rule that judges would violate, right? But if a student saw that a judge took a phone call in the middle of their round, there is an equity concern there from the idea that that student may not have been heard the same way. Angelique is right, given what is happening in the round. And I think that when we talk about building those offices and building those committees, it's truly about, to bounce off of Kristy's point, a shared but diverse school of thought that is regionally, that is background, that is experience. One of the most recent committees I have been on, we had to being a second year out of college, and it was really wonderful to see that shared variety of experience in the activity, because even if it was a debate concern, the speech people who were part of that conversation said, look, I don't necessarily understand this, but I have a question. And it brought a new perspective that I might not think about as someone who just says, well, that's debate. That's normal in debate. But that may not mean that that's creating an equitable space, right? Because we also have structural inequities in our activity that we're sometimes okay with, and we don't challenge enough as community members.
In addition, I think it's also important that we also have a panel of people who have experience working with these issues, that have experience working with students addressing these issues. The content experts of our activity are incredibly important, but they also need to be able to balance how do they work with students. And so if you have individuals in your community that have counseling backgrounds or have diversity training, all of that training is something that needs to be layered into who you ask to sit on equity panels in order to be able to have some of those really complex, important personal conversations for students, especially if they feel like their identities have been violated and their experiences are negative because of what's going on in this equity complaint. And so I think that's really important as well. So it's challenging to have somebody who understands the world of speech and debate and the different events, to the points that were made earlier, but also understands when a student comes to you, how do you approach that student? How do you address those issues? And so it does get challenging at times to create equity panels that are as beneficial as they can be.
Also, like, not just students, right? I would say a solid half of the equity issues I see, probably less so when I worked at the Nationals Equity Office, but at other tournaments, come from adults. They either come from judges or are related to judges, right? And so I've got to deal with a judge who has done something inappropriate or not okay, or a judge who feels that, you know, they have been harassed or discriminated in some sense. And sometimes those are very obvious, overt, easy things to deal with, right? But sometimes, you know, I'll give you a great example. We had a judge come storming into the equity office at one tournament, and he was really, really upset because he said a student's argument called him racist, and he was not going to sit here and be called racist today. So what do you do about that, right? And so having people on the equity panel who at least know how to talk to people, right? Because I often say that a big part of what an equity panel does, first and foremost, we want to make sure everybody is safe, right? That is the most important thing. But once you've done that, really the goal is de-escalation, right? We want to try to de-escalate because we don't want anyone to be hurt or anything like that. But kind of secondarily to that, my mantra that I give to equity offices is that their goal should be justice through reconciliation, not justice through retribution, right? And don't get me wrong, some things are bad enough, and anyone who knows me knows this. As a tournament director, have I bounced judges or bad actors from tournaments? Absolutely. No shame, happy to do it, right? That's not the issue. Some things are bad enough that people do need to be removed. But I think anyone who's been on an equity committee before can speak to the fact that the majority of equity complaints are actually kind of misunderstandings or miscommunications, or someone didn't intend to cause hurt. And we know that intent doesn't matter, because if you caused hurt, you caused hurt, right? We want to get that fixed. But knowing their intention gives us the opportunity to discuss with people and help them learn and be better in the future. And that's especially true when you have an equity complaint between two students. It's a beautiful way for us to create an opportunity to educate them how to better serve themselves, their friends, and the things that they believe in, right? And so it's actually a very, very powerful role we have. So on one hand, it's understanding what we need to do speech and debate-wise. But on another hand, it's having kind of a temperament, or at least the ability to speak to people in a way that leads to de-escalation as much as possible, but also having a firm hand when necessary, right? I don't want to minimize that.
So there's a couple, just real quick, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One I'm going to respond to, and one I'm going to pass to Crawford because he kind of addressed it a minute ago. So Crawford, get ready. The first one is, do you mean experienced people on the panel who may not have speech and debate experience? I think that people in the equity office should have speech and debate experience, because to not have speech and debate experience would then be explaining the intricacies of the activity to someone who doesn't already come from at least some level of understanding of what it is that we do and what it is that is required of the student, the coach, the judge. So, and then Crawford, I'm going to pass the second one to you, which is, what would be the difference between the ombudsman and an equity panel?
I think, at tournaments, we tend to have 2 to 3 large kind of top layer committees, right, that exist sort of over everything. You should have an equity committee. That's what we're talking about today. The way the Venn diagram overlaps, you have the ombuds person office, right? And then you may have a protest committee. And I think that they are a Venn diagram in the idea that there is some overlap between those 3 entities, but they should really refer to one another as well, right? So especially at this conference, I'll kind of use the national tournament as an example, as someone who I have served on a tab team over the course of several years. And anytime there is a baseline, I have a problem, or I'm upset, or I have questions, right? That person's going to the bud. And there are 2 people here who should not go unnoticed. Adrian has taken the brunt of my bud sending strategy. Don Crabtree has as well, right? Go talk to Adrian and Don, get told the answer, come back. But there are also times where people may end up in the bud because for years that was the place to take a concern, right? I have a concern about a rule. I have a concern about something that happened in a room. But really it is an equity issue, right? I've seen harassed via social media direct messages. The bud can address that, but really that should come back to an equity committee because it's not a rules violation. So for me, personally, I think the bud is much more of a rules entity and a general Q&A versus the equity committee, or even a protest committee would be a specific body that hears, investigates, and then offers a solution. I will then pivot that really quick into another question, is what can the result of something brought to the equity panel be? And to David's question, I really love Angelique's idea that it should be justice through reconciliation. When we crafted the Equity Advocate Committee in a different national organization, the big hangup is that the rules didn't allow us to punish people, right? There was no punitive issue. We couldn't throw people out of the tournament. We could only ask the tournament director to that. And I sort of laughed the whole time because I was like, I don't want to be throwing people out of a tournament. That's not our role. Our role is instead concern to bring it to us, for us to find out about it, and then to have a conversation both with the aggrieved party and the party who has potentially done something wrong, to try to educate through. To Angelique's story about our friend who wouldn't be called a racist that day. Some of what the equity committee gets, right? There is no actual equity concern. Like, I'm going to shoot 100% honest. There is actually no concern, right? A student said, if you don't vote for my argument, that would be racist. That you might not like that, right? But that's not wrong. It's not bad. There's more education for the judge than there is the student. And I think that one thing is that then that committee has to be willing to have that conversation to de-escalate. But there are times also where things have happened in rounds where the equity committee's job is to go talk to a judge, talk to a student with their coach, and then go to potentially another coach and their team and say, you've done X. Can we talk about that? You know, why did X happen? Because this is how that made someone feel. And we need to know that our words, they have power, they affect people. And in a way, that education is at the end of the day. And I'll tell you, equity committees, for the most part, don't have a lot of power. We asked someone to write an apology letter from an equity committee that we felt was justified. You and your students should write an apology letter. I'm still waiting on it. Like, I guess in September, I may be like, you don't want to apologize, but I don't have a thing where I can make someone do something, but I can try to slowly build the steps of awareness so that hopefully that coach, those students, or that judge will think about it in the future. Because it may not be about correcting an error like a protest is or a rules violation, but it really is about how to create a kind of forward progress in our community of growth and education.
So just to clarify really quick, the kid that called the judge racist didn't call the judge racist. When I talked to the judge, this is where the conversation is so important, right? Once I got the judge to calm down and really talked with him, the issue is the kid said, if you don't vote on this argument, you are perpetuating a status quo of white supremacy, right? And the judge, with some fragility, right, let's call it what it is, heard that as, this kid is calling me racist, right? Which, you know, whatever. But if there is one takeaway you take from this entire lovely conversation we're having, please let it be this. When you institute an equity panel, and I hope that you will, you want to make sure that all complaints come in writing, whether that's them physically filling out a form because you're at a tournament, or it's online because you're virtual, or even online in person, right? Make a Google form, right? Have them put into words exactly what happened. But here's the most important part. Here's the highlight. Don't forget this. The last question has to be, what is your desired resolution here? Period. End of story. Make that a mandatory question. And I'm going to be honest, at our state tournament, I put that on our rule protest form as well. And let me tell you how many protests that kicks in the pants right there. Like, when you have a coach have to write the words, I want this kid disqualified, they usually won't. They will usually back off. And most of the rule protests we get at our state tournament, which we have not had any in 2 years, by the way, but most of the rule protests we get and our equity complaints, more often than not, the answer that is written is, I just want them talked to so this doesn't happen again. Well, great news. Regardless of what my rule protest committee or my equity committee discovers, we can talk to anybody, right? Like, what a great educational opportunity. That's actually a really positive thing. But by having that there, one, you can measure what their expectation is. Listen, sometimes do people ask for things that are unreasonable and like you literally can't do them? Sure. But that is really rare. Most of the time it is like, listen, I just want people to talk. I want there to be a conversation, or I want this rule clarified later, or I want, great. we can talk about it and approach it that way. So make sure you are always, 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 always asking what their desired resolution is, and have them put it in writing. Don't have it be a verbal conversation from the jump, because then things get misconstrued or whatever. Like, have it in writing, and that way it's very, very, very clear.
I wanted to just bounce to Ryan's question really quick, because I think it's very important. And if you are not looking at the chat, Ryan says, I see these panels and committees happening frequently at bigger tournaments. Where can people go for local tournaments to find people to serve on an equity panel and concern? I think about this like kind of like an apprenticeship. Obviously, we are all here gathered today virtually and not in person somewhere. And I think that that is a great background to the fact that now at tournaments, we can bring in at least someone on equity from outside. So even at the North Carolina State Tournament, our equity officer for the tournament was someone from outside the state of North Carolina that had no dog in the fight. And it's very easy to make Angelique's suggested Google form, right? Populate to my email or to a Slack, to where when one comes in, it goes to that person so that they can be notified, they can jump in a Zoom room and have those conversations. So I think that then the apprentice part of that, right, is to bring people in your own locality that may be on a smaller league, like a local league or an area league, to be part of that. So I'll sign Angelique up for more work. It's my favorite pastime. But even if you reach out to Kristy or Angelique or myself or Scott and you say, we're going to have a tournament and we'd love for you to kind of help us through this process. Well, that office it's not a tab room, right? They don't have to sit there in a Zoom room for 24 hours and wait, but they can gather as need be to have conversations. And as people watch those conversations take place, sometimes having a facilitator from outside of the locality not only helps bringing in that different perspective, but at the same time also offers some mentorship to people who may not travel to larger national tournaments, may not have the opportunity to attend a conference and hear more about equity panels, or serve in a room with them.
To build off of that, I also think there are a lot of individuals within your communities that are no longer actively participating in the activity that you can get. I've encouraged people to reach out to college professors in their local community colleges and reach out to those students, those professors that do work. College professors like myself are always looking for engagement in the community, and it's something that a lot of them are willing to do. Especially those that have experience previously with speech and debate. Our alumni go off and do amazing things in the world. And to be able to reach out to some of them and say, hey, can you do this? Would you be interested in being part of this? I think is, to build to Crawford's point, a way of reinvesting in the community. I think that's a great opportunity for us to pull alumni who have some of the training experiences, but also have that background in the activity that allows them to be part of that conversation. Renee's with us. I just wanted to say hello and give her a chance to introduce herself.
I'm the worst at introducing myself. I think Scott should have realized that by now. Most people that know me. But I'm Renee Moss, AKA Mama Moss. I've been in the speech and debate community for 5 years now. Wow, I still feel like a baby in this area. I still feel like a baby. I just recently opened my own pre-K 3 through 12th grade private school, and I'm building with that organization. And I also have a not-for-profit community center to help build from within the community at large. I'm just going to dive into something I really, really wanted to jump on. Crawford said something that was really, really important to me. He said a lot of the equity committees at the tournaments really don't have any power. And maybe that's the problem. Not that we want to dismiss anybody, but like we all say, there's no repercussions for those that continuously provide it. So in providing it, I think there needs to be some type of repercussion. if someone is repeatedly, and we know they're out there because you guys are very busy in a Facebook group, that we have those repeat offenders that we all keep talking about and no one's doing anything about it, then what's the purpose if we keep allowing them to persist? For instance, not that I will formally tell somebody to apologize, but I had an incident at similar to Crawford. We didn't ask them to apologize, but the coach didn't have time during, and we rescheduled up to 2 months, was following behind like, hey, can we still meet with you? It'll be a year in September and we still haven't met with that coach. I advise the tournament, when they try to register for the tournament, you tell them they can't register. If they could not find the time to listen to a concern, then their team should not be allowed to register. Now that looks bad on the coach. Now the team wants to go to this prestigious tournament, and now they're taking it a little bit more seriously. So that is important. So when we're creating this, no, we don't. Like they say, I agree with Angelique, I agree with Crawford. 95% of the issues are talk it out, let us learn, let us grow. But it's that 5% that really could care less because there's no repercussions from their actions that are destroying our kids within those rooms. So we need to find a way, if we're talking about an equitable tournament and a safe space in these tournaments, we have to find a way for some type of accountability, because that's true justice. All right, I'll turn it back over to you.
I think that's a great point, Renee. I would also add to piggyback on that. I was consulting with another organization about this, another debate organization about this a while back, and they had some issues. And what I said to them is, listen, ultimately, you need to have a strong director, right? A strong tournament director, a strong organizational director. Because listen, if my equity committee at my tournament advises me that, hey, this person did something so reprehensible, they give me the cliff notes, I have empowered them to do that investigation because I trust them. And if they tell me that, then the person's gone, right? I'm going to listen to what they say and I'm going to make that decision and I'm going to remove them. And so having someone in charge who is going to do that is really, really important. And if you have a tournament director that instead punts the responsibility to the equity committee but gives them no authority or power, that's where we all end up in this cycle of frustration that so many of us have, right? Where why do these bad actors get to keep coming back? Like the people Renee is talking about, they should not be allowed back at that tournament, and probably others, until they apologize and do right, right? That actually should be the case. But if you don't have at the top administrative leadership willing to enforce that, that is a huge thing. And that actually leads into another really important point, that the equity committee actually shouldn't really be public facing. And by that I mean, the equity committee is public. You should publicize who is on your equity committee for transparency. I think that's very important. But ultimately, the equity committee advises the tournament director. That is the equity committee's job, to investigate, advise the tournament director or the panel that's in charge, whoever that may be. The person making the announcement or the person removing the bad actor should always be the person in charge, the tournament director, whoever that might be, the president of the organization, the tournament director, whatever. Because it should never be a situation, and we did see this in the last year, where an equity committee was forced to kind of be public facing and make announcements, and then they just took a ton of heat, right? And that's not a fair position to put them in either. And so speaking as a tournament director myself, I am willing to assume that responsibility, and that if I'm going to remove you from my tournament, that is my decision, right? And I've made that decision myself. And so you've got to make sure that whoever's in charge is willing to do that. Otherwise, we end up in the exact situation that Renee is talking about, which is so frustrating and so common.
There's something in the chat that I want to clarify. So NSDA, for me, NSDA had nothing to do with my training. The question in the chat talks about, is NSDA willing to expand who's eligible to receive training to be an equity committee member at the national level, and thus could serve as one on the regional and local circuit? To my knowledge, Angelique, Scott, Crawford, Renee, none of us have been trained by NSDA. Some of us have Scott teaches multicultural type of, I don't want to put words on Scott's resume that aren't there, but I got a certificate in DEI and started a business in it. Angelique has been doing the work for a while. Crawford's been doing the work for a while. So NSDA did not handpick a group of people to become people who are under the umbrella of eligible to be equity officers. That is not, if that is a thing, I did not get the invite. So to be clear about that.
We are just loud and available. So which is a really important lesson, actually. If this is something that's important to you, and it should be loud and be available, right? Like when Crawford said, and Scott, you can call us, you can email us, and we may not be able to help you at your tournament, but I can probably find you 5 people who can, right? And that's the important thing. This is really a collective community thing that we're doing, a movement that is coming from the ground up within this community and not the top down, even though there are people involved in leadership, right? David asked in the chat, if you punted a judge, is the school now on the hook for a hire or providing another judge? What about a student? Do you punt a student? So yes, I have removed students before. It's very rare, but in extreme cases of egregious discrimination, right? For example, if a kid is willfully misgendering their opponent after being corrected, after being talked to, continues to do it, well, they have created a really unsafe space for another kid, right? And they're just being a jerk, right? We don't need them that badly. I will tell you, I am much more patient, obviously, when talking to kids about equity issues, and I'm going to give them a much longer time to, come to what's right. But I'm much quicker to remove judges. I remove judges all the time. Depending on the situation, yes, can you certainly require that they either put up a fee or whatever? Yeah, you could do that. I usually don't, because I don't really care that much. I don't need your judge that bad. I'll talk to the coach or whatever, and if the coach is a jerk about it, I might fine them for their missing judge at that point. But the reality is most coaches are horrified, right, and apologetic, and when that happens, and it's don't worry about it. Listen, if you can pick up a couple extra ballots on your off round, we're cool. I'm not going to fine you. I have a very liberal policy about fines and things like that, but I understand that not everybody does. So it's going to vary from situation to situation.
And so
also bouncing. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, to build off of some of the questions in the chat and what's been said earlier, I think that we need to look at our local communities and look who's there that already does this work. Who is, to Angelique's point, loud and talking about social justice issues and equity issues, who amongst your peers are already in that mindset and can do some of that work. And there was a question about, could you use former retired coaches and judges? Absolutely. But I think within our communities, we already know who those people are. If we stop and really look around at our peers and say, okay, this person really cares about this. This is something that's important, and start to build within our communities as far as unofficial training. There are different organizations out there that do training, and I think I would encourage people. And my master's is in urban education. My background is in teacher education, and so I do teach multicultural education. That was the name of the course, Kristy. But that's my background. But again, there are lots of us that have these backgrounds that I think if we're looking around, we can really add to that. Crawford, to you.
I was just going to, there was a question that we've moved past that I didn't want to get ignored. Melissa asked, what are our thoughts on trigger warnings? Certainly there may be someone who is willing to ask that. I was actually just going to say tomorrow is a great opportunity to actually have an hour-long conversation about triggering content warnings specifically. So in the professional development sessions, there is a trigger and content warning specific session tomorrow. And I would certainly encourage that. This is something equity committees have dealt with over the course of the year. I don't think there's a right answer. I don't think there's a wrong answer. But I just wanted to say that is being provided tomorrow and is certainly something you should hopefully try to get to if you are participating tomorrow. And that was actually all I was going to say on that.
I'd like to answer Luca's question about having students advocate for themselves. I think it's incredibly important that as we start to create panels in local tournaments, that we're very open about that, and that it is something that the students are aware of so that they can have the opportunity. But I will also tell you that at the national organization, multiple complaints, concerns that have been brought to the equity committee were not brought forth by those that were the victims of the situation. It was others. It was a judge. It was another coach. It was individuals that were in the round observing. It was not the person who was the victim. And so we do need to make sure that our students are aware that there is a place for them to go. And often when they have come to us in the national tournament, when we give them that document to fill out, they wanted to talk. We give them the document and we never hear from them again, to Angelique's point. They just needed that moment, that space to talk, to feel validated, and to be heard. And I think that's incredibly important and something that we need to make sure that we're offering them. But we have to let our students know that that place exists at tournaments, or they will feel like they don't have a place to turn to.
And I think Luca's question is really great because it also builds on one we skipped over from Luis, which is how would you handle who submits the concerns? Should it go through coaches or simply be available to all participants? Different schools of thought on this. I don't necessarily know that one is particularly right over the others, right? But my philosophy is anybody attending the tournament, student, coach, community member, whatever, can fill out our equity form. It is a good policy to link, to explain on the form that, hey, if you are a student, we need to have an adult with you when we talk to you, just as general policy, right? And that can be your coach if that's someone you feel safe to say this around, but sometimes their coach is not someone they feel safe around, which is kind of what Luca is talking about. In which case, hey, is there another community member or coach we can have come with you? Or can we get mom and dad or aunt and uncle, grandma on the phone, somebody, a grown-up that you feel comfortable to have in your corner? Because I do like that NCFL, so the Catholic Forensic League, they've labeled the equity office equity advocates. And I do like that because it's a great way for us to explain, especially to the kids, that we are advocating for you, right? We're here to be your champion in your corner in this situation and help you work through this. And so on top of that, it's important for us to have other grown-ups there that you're comfortable with. But yeah, I'm down with anybody can fill out a form and we can talk to anybody. If for whatever reason the coach or grown-up or whatever is not available, I do always explain to the kids like, hey, I'm going to fill your coach in with about this, right, when we're done. But if it is an adversarial thing, like if it's two kids, right, and there was an issue, I always make sure the coaches are present for any of that, right? We want to have everybody on the same page. So yeah, anybody can fill out an equity form, and I think it should be available to everyone.
There's something in the chat that is always, well, two things really quick. The first one is I want to clarify that anyone who's ever done speech does not an equity officer make. To clarify, I think that is one of the biggest ball drops. It's like, hey, Kristy, we want you to do our equity office. And then it's like, no, we're just going to have one of the coaches do it. And it's like, oh, well, okay, cool. Like, have they done this before? And they're like, no, but they're really nice. And so I think that there is more, it is a disservice to the students and the coaches and the judges and the parents, whoever it is that comes in to the equity office. It's a disservice to them if the person that they're having this conversation with has no experience navigating these conversations. They are not the most comfortable conversations to have. Sometimes people are super emotional and they're crying. Can you deal with that in a positive way where, again, we are supporting the student, the activity, the coach, the goal, right? And so I think that that's a misconception. And then really quick, Jerry said it sounds like that we would benefit from NSDA offering a certification. So I am always a firm believer in, we have a whole lot of states and one national office. And I think it would be more beneficial if the states took control over that instead of throwing everything at nationals, because that also goes to the assumption that everyone who is doing speech and debate attends the national tournament. I think there are more people that will attend on the state level than there are people that attend on the national level. Sometimes I think that a lot is put on NSDA, and they're running a marathon that they cannot keep up with because the activity is constantly changing. That's not to say that National shouldn't offer a certification. I just think that at some point we need to start at the state level and build up rather than it starting at the national level and falling down. And that's my 2 cents on that, but please other people chime in. But I do think it's important, some type of education, certification, conversation, something other than James is free this weekend and he is a debate coach and he should be the panel. It's like, I think we can do better than that.
And to Kristy's first point, I'll just sum it up this way. A bad equity office is worse than no equity office, because you can re-traumatize those kids and community members who are already dealing with stuff that's intense and heavy. You can make it worse, right? Those are really, really, so a bad equity office that you just threw together that has no power, that has no training, that has no background in this is going to do a lot more harm than having no equity office. And I don't think you should have no equity office, but just keep that in mind.
I think another important thing to think about as well, which is something that has not taken place, is how do we talk after tournament about what an equity office has done? Because a lot of these questions bounce around, well, what is the power you had? What is done? How do you handle this situation? And I do think that there is a way for equity offices to publish information in a very confidential manner that strips all of the knowledge out of who that is, right? I don't need to say, Angelique appeared in the office on Friday morning, concerned about a round that her student was in, right? That is not what I should do. I should instead say, a report came in that this occurred in a round. This is what the committee found in our recommendation. Providing that back to the community in an open sourced way, right? To coaches that may have attended the tournament, helps in a way to educate the community about what is an equity concern and what are our common practices, in a way establishes some very loose jurisprudence. I don't mean that then you should have equity offices that are like, well, at Nationals 2019, they decided that X should occur, so we should do that. No, but we should see what the full idea of these conversations and concerns are, because we have seen them range from someone has threatened my life on social media, right? Which in fact, there was a question about that earlier. I don't think that should go to a district committee. I don't think that should go to a state committee. I think that that should immediately go to a tournament director. And most times in this activity, the tournament director and the equity office are mandatory reporters, and that gets reported, right? Someone has been threatened with harm, that gets reported. Those are serious things that too often we have said, oh, kids being kids. Kids being kids is no longer the way we should deal with things. But back to this idea of, if we are talking about what we are doing at tournaments and how we are rectifying concerns, then as a community, we learn through so much more transparency when that information can be provided in a way that doesn't re-traumatize. It's the same way that if you think about a rules protest, it's like, I want to make this rules protest, but I have no idea how they're going to see it. But if I know the people making that decision and how they've seen those concerns over time, I know better what to expect to not only be in a place where I'm aware of what is happening, but I can also talk to my student who has the concern about what will occur. Because to this point of people who get access to a reporting form, who may not ever mention, right, may never submit it, or may never come back to follow up on it, so often that is out of wanting to just say their piece and walk away, but also fear. I think about this through a large lens of gender identity, which is also, because I've had this conversation with her, why I know Angelique says we have to have an adult, and it's not necessarily the coach, right? It's the right adult. And that may be mom, that may be dad, that may be grandma, that may just be my friend down the street who's over the age of 18. But we need that adult, because even now in a digital world, especially when the majority of us are looking at another year of virtual tournaments, we're no longer in a room with a student having this conversation. When we're in a room with a student providing this conversation, we can make sure that they are safe. In a virtual world, we just log out of a Zoom room and hope that we have done our job to provide safety, to provide closure. And the idea of having an adult there is to close loop and provide students with the safest situation. And I think that one thing is that too often tournaments are having equity offices. We should have one too. We should just throw together some trusted individuals and let them have at it. That does not mean that the right decisions or procedures are getting made. And so I do think there must be a much larger call for transparency in our activity about how we deal with these items.
Joanne asked a question in the chat about how do we talk, what are our thoughts about, and how do we handle inappropriate judge comments? I'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts on that.
If I could just interrupt for a second, I'll put my camera on so you can see me too. We had in the past, if a judge had made a comment and it was paper ballots, I'd just lose that particular round of ballot. So that my kid didn't have to deal with that. Now they're all online. And I really think that the equity officer or someone should be screening them before they get posted onto Tab Room, because we had an unfortunate experience this year. A judge just disagreed politically with one of our students' speeches and took him to task. And it was published before I could do anything. And so we had to have a meeting with the kid's parents and with the kid. And luckily we caught it before they saw it, but we needed to have a discussion with them. And that could have all been bypassed if somehow there was some sort of control on what gets to your student.
So they're actually.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, there actually is a tab room setting, right, where your tournament director can set it so the ballots get released to the coaches before they get released to the kids, right? Like that is a thing that is one of the settings they can do. And I encourage that. I understand, especially on the circuit, like we want to have, quick ballot turnaround so people can see them and get feedback and all that goodness. I totally understand that. But I can tell you, like at our tournament, at our state tournament, I don't release the ballots right away because they go to the coaches and the coaches can disseminate them to the kids, because that in some way mirrors the paper situation we had before. But in addition to that, I think as we've moved more streamlined into these more like tech savvy, right, tab room type tournaments, right, which is fabulous. We've, especially from coming from cards, right, if we go all the way back to that, we need a lot fewer people in our tab rooms, right? And so we see that as much more efficient, right? Like, oh, now our tab room can run with 5 people instead of 15. Well, why don't we take those 10 people that used to sit there and have to triple check every card and whatever, and put them each round on checking the ballots that have been submitted. And if they find something offensive, questionable, whatever, flag it to the tournament director. Hey, Angel, can you look at this, right? Hey, Crawford, hey, Scott, hey, Kristy, whoever, like, hey, Renee, can we look at this? And can you look at this really quick and tell me if you think this is okay? Do we need to lose this ballot? Because here's the other thing. If it's bad enough and the tournament is still going, I want to talk to that judge before they make some more squirrely comments to kids, right? I want to make sure that they're going to be a safe educator and remind them that their role as a judge is not just an adjudicator. You are also an educator in the back of the room or on the other side of the screen. So there are steps we can take. Sorry to have jumped in on this, but this is something I'm very passionate about because it is my biggest criticism of e-ballots, is that we seem to have just like thrown to the wind this idea that we need to review ballots. I know we want to believe that all of our judges are safe and wonderful and educational and great, and the overwhelming majority are, and I want to be very clear about that. But we know that there are always going to be those instances, and they can cause tremendous harm. I remember crying as a little 15-year-old girl doing LD because a judge told me my voice was too high, right? And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do about that, right? And it's very, very important that we remember we're working with kids and that we take some of that labor that has been streamlined and reallocate it to things like this. And I really don't think it's very hard to have folks kind of just scan through ballots, between rounds. I think it's a great, great thing we should do.
I will say, because I feel like this came up at nationals, or maybe it came up at state in Texas. I'm not sure, but it definitely came up this year. And I believe it was Crawford that talked about the power that the equity office does not have. So especially online, when we're working these tournaments, it'll be like, for example, in Texas, I could go in, I could search a school, I could find a school, find a student, find a judge. And that was all I had access to. So I didn't have access to read ballots. That had not been clicked. And I think a big part of that is I need to be able to justify to the tournament director why I need access to be able to read ballots, right? And so to Angelique's side, like, yes, I think the idea of having someone skim the ballots sounds amazing, but I think about, and I'm not going to say any names, but I think about tournaments like the Texas State Tournament is massive. Stanford is massive. Glenbrook's massive. We're talking thousands of ballots every single round. And so I don't know how feasible it would be in prelims to be able to do that. I think it sounds good, but I don't know. I don't know how possible it would be. And then the other thing that I think is one of the most important things is the idea of teachable moments. If a judge writes something that's inappropriate, it is possible that they did not know it was inappropriate, or that the way in which they phrased it. So they'll explain, oh, well, this is what I was trying to say. And then they hear, but this is the perception of what you were trying to say. And they're mortified that they wrote it in a way where what they were trying to say was taken in a different direction. That being said, removing things from a judge's ballot is not something that should be done in secret. If I, as an equity officer, am going to remove something from a ballot, like I need to have a conversation with that judge. Because if I don't, then they're going to think that it's okay to say what they said, and they're going to write it again. So I think it's important to recognize that, and also to recognize, as coming from the speech side, like there was always a joke that all you need is a pulse to judge prose, right? But to do debate, you have to have a resume. That's just the way that it is. But that being said, when my mother writes a ballot, she's writing it from the perspective of a mother. She's writing it from the perspective of 50, 60, 70 years old, and she wants to help out her daughter, just like so many judges just want to help out their kid or their grandkid whose coach told them that they had to supply 10 judges, right? So they're not coming at this from a perspective of, oh, I get to be an educator today. They're not thinking like that because they're not educators. And so to Angelique's point, we definitely need to, like some teams, some tournaments have judge training. I think judge training is fantastic. The bigger your tournament gets, the more difficult that reality is to actually achieve. So I think there's a lot happening, and the good intentions are there, and it's just a matter of like going to the tournament director. I didn't know that button was there. Now I know that button is there. And as an equity officer who was used a lot last year, I'll start encouraging them so that the coaches can see ballots, and the coaches can say, hey, like, check this out and have this conversation, and we can do those things and create better judges by addressing these things rather than just pulling the ballot or removing a comment that a judge made.
Honestly, the most powerful language you can have when talking to a judge about an issue like this is, again, listen to them. Most people just want to be heard, right? So listen to them and their justification. And then very calmly just be like, hey, I hear you, right? Validation. I hear what you're saying. But do you see how that might come across to a 15-year-old? Right? Or do you see how that might come across? And for most adults, I genuinely in my heart believe, because it is the only thing that keeps me going every day, that most people are good. So if most people are good, then most people react to that by saying, okay, they pause, they stop, and they think. And that is what you want. You want them to pause and reflect, and that is how you actually achieve growth. And we make this whole culture of speech and debate better for everybody, and that includes us as coaches, right? And that's really, really important.
And I'm going to have to pause and reflect at this moment and let y'all conclude today. Thank you so much. This is a dream team to hear from. And thank you to Scott and the rest of the panelists for joining us today. Everyone, please now join us to continue this conversation. Perfect segue, y'all. Y'all must be educators or something. To our town hall, which is about recruiting and training judges. So we are really appreciative of your time and your labor, and we look forward to working with you again in about 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Scott, you're the best. Got that on the recording.
Love you, Scott.